Hi, my name is Adam Montgomery. I'm a Niagara-based historian who's passionate about visiting and photographing the region's old cemeteries. Much of the region's history over the past 200 years can be found by examining these sites and looking at the gravestones for those buried there. This video is the second half of a two-part series which looks at some of the interesting and touching memorials at Fairview Cemetery in Niagara Falls. I highly recommend watching part 1 on the Niagara Falls Museum YouTube channel before watching this video, as it provides some background and history of the cemetery itself. Let's get started. The first thing I wanted to show you is not an individual memorial, but rather a whole plot for the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a Catholic order of nuns. The Institute, whose members are commonly known as the Loretto Sisters, is an institute formed in 1609 in England by Mary Ward, a Catholic during a time when Catholics were persecuted in England. Throughout its over 400-year history, the order has been involved largely in education, but also many other activities. In the 19th century, they ran free schools for pupils unable to pay, and convent schools for young women whose families could afford the tuition. They came to Canada in the 1840s and Niagara Falls in 1861. Their building, called the Loretto Convent of the Blessed Sacrament, was located overlooking the falls on a 6-acre plot of land, and they attracted students and boarders from both the Canadian and American side of the falls. The Loretto sisters were valuable members of the community, and in addition to education, they also engaged in charitable works and attended burial services for the dead. After going through a series of changes, the building became the Catholic High School of Niagara Falls until 1982, and then the Loretto Convent and Christian Life Center, a place of religious retreats for students, until 2006 when it closed. The sisters' history in the Falls can be found at Fairview Cemetery, where many of the sisters were buried over the course of the 20th century. Also buried here is Reverend Mother Teresa, foundress of the Institute in North America. Born in Ireland, she was fluent in English, French, and Italian, and also a musician. She was heavily invested in the education of young women at a time when many still frowned upon that in North America, and according to the Dictionary of Canadian Biography, from which her photo is taken, she was respected by countless religious friends, both Catholic and Protestant, and by her many pupils. Those visiting the falls can also find many of the sisters buried at Our Lady of Peace Cemetery, beside the convent building. The church was founded in 1837, and before this cemetery filled up, most sisters were buried there and are marked by floriated iron crosses. I encourage anyone interested in Niagara Falls history to read more about the history of this organization and its activities. The next memorial is a fairly recent one from 2017 that tells an amazing story. That year, a partnership between the City of Niagara Falls Cemetery Services and a range of Legion branches, as well as monument makers and others, led to the creation of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, a tomb for a soldier who had been previously buried in the cemetery's Field of Honor and identified with a flat grave marker. There, on September 16, 2017, during Royal Canadian Legion Week, a military funeral took place, and the soldier was entombed in the memorial. Inspired by similar tombs for unknown soldiers around the world, particularly those for after the end of the First World War, this memorial is prominently placed on an island in the cemetery, visible from many locations. It's a raised crypt monument, and on top is a sword and helmet. In this photo, you can see rocks and flowers left on top by visitors as a mark of respect and commemoration. It's quite touching to return to the memorial time and time again and see new flowers there each time. Beside the island on which the memorial sits are several oak trees called Vimy oaks, grown with acorns or saplings from the Vimy battlefield, a place where so many Canadian soldiers died during the First World War. As they mature, they will be living reminders of the sacrifice so many soldiers made during many military operations throughout the 20th century and beyond. There is also another memorial stone beside it, flanked by both a Canadian and Union Jack flag. It has the words, "At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them," from the poem For the Fallen by British poet Lawrence Binyon. Also nearby is a restored cenotaph originally sited at the location of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 51 and moved several times. It was restored and put there in 2019, along with 2 plaques that list the names of soldiers who died in the First and Second World Wars, as well as the Korean War. This entire section of the cemetery is a somber, touching sight, well worth visiting on each and every trip to Fairview. Turning now to individual memorials, one shouldn't visit Fairview Cemetery for the first time without finding and visiting the gravestone of Robert Nathaniel Dett. Born in what is now Niagara Falls, musician and writer Dr. Robert Nathaniel Dett was the first black student to graduate from the Oberlin Conservatory of Music in Ohio, the second oldest conservatory in the United States. His accomplishments included writing prizes from Harvard University and becoming the first black director of music at the Hampton Institute in Virginia. He also earned a Master of Music degree at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester and was awarded honorary doctorate degrees from Howard University and Oberlin. He is considered a seminal figure in the preservation and study of spirituals and a great teacher and inspirer of black musicians of later generations. In Niagara Falls, the British Methodist Episcopal Church on Pier Street, where he was organist from 1898 to 1903, was renamed in his honor in 1938 and is now a National Historic Site. The Nathaniel Dett Choral Ensemble, founded in Toronto in 1998, is also named after him. I wanted to finish off discussing Dett by showing you some images from the Niagara Falls Public Library, which show the Dett Chapel around 1920, and a few later images showing the beautiful interior. A memorial that tells a sad story at Fairview is this one for Mary Heisel, who died on April 10, 1942 in an automobile accident in Aylmer, Ontario. Mary was born in Niagara Falls, New York in 1915, but was living on Armory Street on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls when the Second World War began. In civilian life, she worked as a shoe clerk and bookkeeper. When the Royal Canadian Air Force Women's Division was formed, she enlisted in Hamilton on January 20, 1942, and became an aircraft woman second class. Sadly, less than 3 months after her enlistment, she was on leave and died in a car accident. She was, I believe, just the second woman to die after the formation of the Women's Division of the Air Force. This newspaper image shows pallbearers leaving St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church in Niagara Falls with her casket during the day of her funeral. She was buried with full military honors. Those interested can find out more about her story by Google searching her name. I wanted to turn now briefly to some of the interesting stones, symbols, and motifs that can be found on stones at Fairview. The first is this rustic memorial for the Clark family. As is obvious from even one look at it, the memorial is made to look like a number of stacked logs of various sizes. The maker did an excellent job, and from afar at first glance the eye can be tricked into thinking this is actual wood. On the front and sides are panels for inscriptions to indicate the birth and death date of those buried around it, and on the top is a scroll with the words, "At Rest." These rustic memorials, popular around the 1880s until the early to mid-20th century, also came in designs that looked like trees or sometimes crosses. Although hard for us to imagine when we think the world is changing faster than ever, during the late 19th century, industrialization and the growth of cities made many feel that their old rustic way of life was disappearing. This was the age of the railway, streetcars, and later the automobile. Monuments such as this one can be seen as a homage to an old way of life, and of course, a way for a family to differentiate their monument from the traditional designs that we so often see in old cemeteries. The next memorial is a sad one for little Barbara Rosenberger, who died at just 2 years old in 1935 from a ruptured appendix. Her memorial is a little dirty in this picture, but on close inspection we can see an angel in front of a cross, holding flowers in its left hand and scattering them with its right. Angels scattering petals over a grave is often interpreted as a blessing, but it also has associations with the long history of human lives being compared to flowers, that is, fragile and short-lived. In the Judeo-Christian context, this tradition goes back to the Bible. For example, Psalm 103, 15-16 state, "As for man, his days are as grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourisheth. For the wind passeth over it, and it is gone." Another appropriate passage comes from the book of Job 14, when it is stated that humans, quote, spring up like flowers and wither away, like fleeting shadows, they do not endure. Thus, like many Christian symbols and motifs on gravestones, we can interpret this one as having both a hopeful and sorrowful message. Sometimes, even when memorials are so eroded that we can't read the inscription, we can still see symbols and motifs. On this stone, we have a hand coming down from the top, and just below it, a bird. A hand, when coming from above, that is, the sky or heaven, is interpreted as the hand of God. Here, it's releasing or pointing to a dove, a symbol of peace and the Holy Spirit. In this instance, the message is one of hope and peace, indicating that the deceased and their family can trust that death on earth is just the beginning. Lastly, I wanted to show you this monument for the Kerr family, since it relates to our earlier discussion of the Unknown Soldier Memorial. This stout granite monument serves as the family stone to mark the plot, and in the top left corner we can see oak leaves and acorns. Like most cemetery symbols, they can mean many things, but often they're interpreted as having associations with strength and endurance, which in the context of a cemetery, where death and loss can sometimes play a central place in our mind, inspires thoughts of hope. That concludes part 2 of this series on Fairview Cemetery. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the cemetery's history, as well as some of the amazing monuments and lives of people buried there. It's a great place for a walk and to take in some of the history of Niagara Falls over the past century and beyond. Some days I enjoy going there just to look at the amazing art that is literally everywhere you turn. Thanks to the Niagara Falls Museum for commissioning these videos, to the Niagara Falls Public Library for some of the great images of Niagara Falls, and to you, the viewer, for watching. If you're interested in more of my activities, links to my website and social media sites are included at the end of this video. Thanks again.